You know what's peculiar about humans? They're the only species in the entire galaxy that manages to turn basic survival into an art form. And yet they completely fail at understanding the simplest social cues. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, or at least somewhere close to it. The day everything changed started typically enough. I was calibrating the quantum displacement sensors on the Nebula Whisper, a maintenance task so mundane that even my secondary consciousness was yawning. That's when Jackson Bennett, arguably the most clueless human in our diplomatic envoy, sauntered into the control room with all the grace of a three-legged Glornak. "Morning, Kixa," he said, his voice carrying that peculiar human charm that somehow managed to be both endearing and infuriating. "Rough night with the atmosphere processors." I turned one of my 4 optical receptors toward him, the others still focused on the holographic display. "My people, the Vorthack, pride ourselves on our multitasking abilities." "Hardly. My translator chip rendered my native clicks and whistles into basic common galactic. Unlike certain species, I don't require rest to maintain cognitive function." He laughed, that irritating human sound that seems to emerge from nowhere and everywhere at once. "Fair enough." He moved closer, his heat signature painting warm trails through my infrared vision. That's when he said it. Those 5 words that would cascade into a diplomatic incident of epic proportions. "You look beautiful today, Kixa." Time seemed to stutter. My translator chip word, double-checking the words. Yes, it had processed correctly. The phrase was clear, unmistakable, and completely, utterly inappropriate according to every diplomatic protocol in the Galactic Standard Handbook. That I pivoted my main visual processor to face him directly, my 4 arms freezing mid-gesture. "I what?" "You look beautiful," he repeated, seemingly oblivious to the fact that he'd just committed what my people consider the equivalent of declaring war through interpretive dance. "Did you polish your carapace or something? It's really shining today." Now, here's where you need to understand our cultural differences. For humans, calling someone beautiful is apparently a compliment. For Vorthack, commenting on someone's appearance in such a familiar manner suggests you are either challenging them to a dominance ritual or proposing immediate mating. Neither of which Jackson Bennett was qualified for. Why secondary consciousness screamed a dozen alarms while my primary mind scrambled for a response. "Bennett," I said carefully, my translator struggling to keep my rising agitation from bleeding through. "Are you aware of what you just said?" "Yeah." He tilted his head, a gesture that's somehow even more confusing than their verbal communication. "I gave you a compliment." "A compliment?" I repeated slowly. "Bennett, in my culture, that's the equivalent of I searched for an appropriate human comparison. Of proposing marriage while simultaneously insulting someone's mother." His eyes widened. Those strange, single-pupilled organs that humans use to process visual information somehow managed to convey horror, amusement, and confusion all at once. "Oh God, I didn't mean. I was just being nice." "Being nice," I echoed, my third arm unconsciously tapping an agitated rhythm on the control panel. "Bennett, you are either the smoothest diplomat in human history or the most culturally insensitive being I have ever met." "I'm going with option 2, he admitted, running a hand through that ridiculous fur that grows on human heads. "But seriously, can we pretend this never happened? I really don't want to explain to my superiors why I accidentally proposed to our lead xenobiologist." That's when the proximity alarms started shrieking. Because apparently, the universe decided that one diplomatic disaster wasn't enough for the day. "Incoming transmission from the Dominion Council," the ship's AI announced in its irritatingly calm voice. "Priority Alpha. All senior staff to the bridge immediately." I fixed Bennett with what I hoped was my most intimidating glare. "This conversation isn't over, human. But if we die today, I want the record to show that you are responsible for both our imminent doom and this conversation." We rushed to the bridge, where Captain Zhang was already issuing orders. The main view screen flickered to life, revealing the stern visage of Council Prime Varenthi, their multiple eyes narrowing as they focused on our crew. "Captain Zhang," they began, their voice carrying the weight of 10,000 years of bureaucratic authority, "we have received reports of a diplomatic incident aboard your vessel." Something about inappropriate mating proposals. My carapace turned what humans charmingly call embarrassment purple. Bennett, to his credit, stepped forward immediately. Council Prime, I take full responsibility. There was a cultural misunderstanding, and the incident has awakened the sleeping court. Varinthi interrupted, their words hitting us like a plasma blast. They demand a formal trial to determine whether this human's actions constitute a declaration of courtship, warfare, or both. The bridge fell silent. The sleeping court hadn't been awakened in 3 centuries. They were legendary for their interpretation of ancient laws and their tendency to solve disputes through creative, often lethal methods. Zhang pinched the bridge of her nose. With all due respect, Council Prime, can't we handle this through regular diplomatic channels? The matter is out of our hands. The human Bennett must appear before the court within the next cycle. The Vorthak Kixa will serve as the primary witness. Perfect. Just perfect. I'd gone from xenobiologist to star witness in what could be the most ridiculous trial in galactic history. Bennett turned to me, his face displaying that unique human expression that indicates both extreme worry and determination. I'm sorry I drag you into this, Kixa, but I promise I will make it right. I click my tongue in frustration. Bennett, you do realize the sleeping court's verdict could range from a formal apology to ritual combat to the death. Yeah, he said, somehow still managing to smile. But hey, at least it won't be boring, right? That's humans for you. Facing potential execution with the same enthusiasm they approach a recreational activity. Sometimes I wonder if they're collectively suicidal or just phenomenally optimistic. The next few hours were a blur of preparation. We studied ancient Vorthak legal texts, with Bennett struggling to pronounce words that required at least 3 tongues and a clicking palate. Zhang worked the diplomatic channels, trying to find some precedent that might save us. Meanwhile, I found myself in the odd position of both prosecutor and defender. Okay, so if I tell them I meant it as a compliment, that's worse. Bennett asked during one of our preparation sessions. Much worse. It suggests premeditation. Better to claim temporary insanity. But I can't claim insanity for being nice. I spread my forearms in exasperation. Bennett, you were trying to apply human logic to Vorthak law. That's like trying to perform surgery with a soup ladle. Hey, I know some surgeons who would manage, he quipped. Despite myself, I found my mandibles curving in what might approximate amusement. This human, for all his cultural blindness, was growing on me like an endearing fungal infection. The summons came precisely on schedule. The sleeping court appeared via quantum entanglement, their forms flickering into solidity in our conference room. They were magnificent and terrifying, ancient Vorthak who had uploaded their consciousness to quantum matrices eons ago. Human Bennett, the speaker intoned, you stand accused of the most serious offense, casual flirtation. Bennett blinked. Casual, what now? In our culture, I explained quickly. Commenting on physical appearance without proper ritualistic preparation is considered the height of disrespect and impropriety. It's called casual flirtation, and it's punishable by a series of trials that escalate in complexity and danger, the speaker finished. However, should you succeed in all 3 trials, your offense shall be forgiven, and the accused may keep their life. Keep my life? I thought this was about understanding. Bennett protested. Oh, there will be understanding. The speaker replied ominously. The profound understanding that comes from confronting mortality. And that's how Jackson Bennett, the man who complimented the wrong alien at the wrong time, found himself entered into the trial of 3 truths, an ancient Vorthak tradition that hadn't been invoked since the Great Euphemism War of 2847. Trial 1 was the trial of observation. Bennett had to correctly identify the emotional state of 5 different Vorthak elders based solely on their pheromone signatures. No visual cues, no verbal hints, just pure chemistry. This is impossible, he whispered as they prepared the testing chamber. I don't even have the right organs to smell half these compounds. Then you should have thought of that before you complimented my carapace. I shot back, but my hearts were racing. The human had no chance, they began. Elder Crothos emitted their pheromones. Complex cocktail that indicated. I watched Bennett's face scrunch up in concentration. Anger mixed with amusement. Correct. The speaker announced that my 3rd eye widened. Pure luck. Elder Vorik was next. Their scent was subtle, sophisticated. Nostalgia for lost opportunities. Correct. Impossible. The human was guessing. He had to be. By the fifth elder, even I was beginning to doubt. When Bennett correctly identified the complex emotion of resigned acceptance of youth's foolishness from Elder Yivak, the entire court buzzed with surprise. How? I demanded when they took a brief recess. You can barely distinguish coffee from poison in your own food. Bennett grinned, pulling out a small device. I had my engineer friends rig up a portable chemical analyzer. It's picking up the pheromones and translating them to visual patterns on my contact lens. See? Humans might not have all the right equipment, but we sure know how to build it. My mandibles dropped open. You cheated. I innovated, he corrected. There's no rules saying I can't use my species' technology to overcome our biological limitations. The court asked me to identify emotions, not to smell them personally. And that's when I began to understand humans a little better. They don't just accept their limitations. They build elaborate workarounds while maintaining an almost childlike pride in their cleverness. The first trial was passed. 2 more remained. And something told me that the really challenging parts were yet to come. Trial 2 was the trial of patience, which involved mediating a dispute between 2 Vorthack philosophers debating whether the sound of one claw clicking was truly sound or merely vibration. The debate had supposedly been ongoing for 60 years. This should be easy, Bennett said confidently, adjusting his translator. How hard can philosophy be? 7 hours later, both philosophers had split into multiple consciousness streams to argue with themselves. Bennett's left eye had developed a twitch, and he'd consumed enough caffeine to power a small ship's engine. So you're saying that sound is both the perception and the reality, but reality only exists through perception, which means sound exists only when perceived, but perception requires sound to perceive sound, which means stop. Bennett's shout echoed through the chamber. Listen to yourselves. You have been arguing in circles for decades because you have forgotten what you are even arguing about. The philosophers paused, their multiple optical sensors blinking in unison. The question isn't whether one claw clicking makes a sound, Bennett continued, his voice carrying that peculiar human energy that emerges from desperation. The real question is, why are you wasting so much time arguing about it when you could be using that claw to create something new? Dead silence. So quiet that my auxiliary auditory sensors strained to confirm the room still contained atmosphere. Elder philosopher Cortax's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. Create something new, with the clawing of time. The philosophy of action versus the action of philosophy. Oh no, I groaned, recognizing the signs of a breakthrough. He's going to be famous now. And indeed, within moments, both philosophers were consumed by their newfound revelation, beginning what would later become known as the doctrine of action philosophy. Bennett had just inadvertently launched a new school of thought that would influence Vorthack culture for generations. I solved a 60-year philosophical deadlock by telling them to stop thinking so much. Bennett whispered to me. Yes, and I hate that it worked, I replied. Very humans. Solving complex problems with practical common sense. 2 trials down. The final challenge awaited, and something told me it wouldn't be as fortunate as the first 2. The trial of truth was exactly what it sounded like. Bennett had to face a traditional Vorthack truth chamber, where the accused must answer 3 questions while under the influence of a powerful honesty compound. The chamber was a crystalline sphere that resonated with the brain waves of its occupant, making lies physically painful. Just remember, I told him as the door sealed, the compound doesn't just force truth. It forces the truth you believe. If you have deluded yourself, you will fail. Bennett nodded grimly. Thanks for the vote of confidence. The chamber came to life, its interior pulsing with bioluminescent energy. The speaker's voice resonated through the walls. Question 1. Why did you truly compliment the Vorthack Kixa's appearance? Bennett's voice crackled through the chamber speakers. This is weird. I said it because I was fascinated by how the xenomorphic paneling was reacting to her carapace today. The way the light circuits in her exoskeleton were interfacing with our ship's maintenance lighting was actually quite beautiful from a technical perspective. I appreciate functional aesthetics. The chamber pulsed green, truth, that I blinked. You found my carapace technically beautiful? That was actually somewhat logical for a human. Question 2. Do you understand the cultural implications of your action now? Yes. It's like if someone walked up to me on Earth and commented on my childbearing potential while discussing the weather. Inappropriate doesn't begin to cover it. I now understand that Vorthack's society values appearance commentary exclusively in specific ceremonial contexts, and I was as out of place as a quantum physicist at a poetry reading. Green again. He was learning. Question 3. Given the choice between maintaining peaceful relations and accepting execution for your error, which would you choose? The chamber fell silent. I felt my heart's hammering. This was it, the question that would determine everything. That's not a fair question, Bennett's voice wavered, because it implies those are the only two options. And I'm human. We are terrible at accepting limited choices. If I had to pick between the two, I'd choose peaceful relations. But I reject the premise. I find a third option, probably involving a lot of apologies, some creative diplomatic solutions, and maybe inventing a new holiday where humans and Vorthack can safely complement each other's carapaces without international incidents. The chamber flickered between green and white, partial truth and aspiration. The speaker turned to me. As the aggrieved party, you must interpret this response. Does he speak truth to our traditions? I considered carefully. He speaks truth to human nature. Faced with binary choices, they create tertiary solutions. It's infuriating, but it's also how they have survived long enough to reach the stars. An interesting observation. What is your judgment? I took a deep breath through my spiracles. He passed the trials not through understanding our culture, but by applying his own in ways that illuminated ours. Perhaps this is the beginning of a different kind of alliance. The sleeping court conferred in frequencies beyond even my range. Finally, the speaker rendered judgment. Human Bennett, you have completed the 3 trials through methods that respect our traditions while exemplifying your own. Your offense is forgiven, and you are hereby granted the title of Cultural Bridge Builder, a position that hasn't existed since the last age of cross-species integration. Bennett emerged from the chamber, looking significantly more relieved. I'm just glad that's over. Oh, it's not over, I informed him. As Cultural Bridge Builder, you are now responsible for preventing similar incidents throughout the galaxy. Congratulations, you have essentially created a new, terrifying job for yourself. His face fell. Can't I just apologize and promise never to do it again? Where's the fun in that? I clicked in what I hoped he recognized as amusement. The aftermath was predictably chaotic. Bennett's new position required him to attend every diplomatic function, his human perspective becoming invaluable for preventing cross-cultural disasters. He developed a reputation as the man who could find common ground between any two species, no matter how bizarre their value systems. 6 months later, during the Galactic Cultural Exchange, Bennett found himself mediating between the Thraxians, who communicated through color changes, and the Volturi, who were essentially living sound waves. This is impossible, I observed, watching him try to translate chromatic poetry into sonic frequencies. You can barely manage basic color theory, says the alien who didn't know humans could be beautiful without causing interstellar incidents, he retorted, fingers flying over his newly upgraded translator. I clicked thoughtfully. About that original comment, don't say it. You now use that translator to complement dozens of species daily. Perhaps there's some cosmic irony that you have found your purpose by nearly causing a war. He paused, grinning. You know what's funny? I still don't fully understand your culture, even after all this. But I think that's the point. Understanding isn't about knowing everything. It's about being willing to try, being ready to apologize when you mess up, and somehow turning disasters into opportunities. I contemplated this human wisdom. Perhaps that's why your species has surprised so many of us. You don't master other cultures. You stumble through them and somehow make it work. Story of our species, really, he laughed. Advanced enough to travel stars, too clueless to understand we are insulting our colleagues. The Thraxian emitted a pattern of orange stripes that Bennett's translator interpreted as a mused agreement. Balturi responded with a frequency that suggested philosophical contemplation. And Kixa, xenobiologist for the Nebula Whisper, realized that perhaps the most significant discoveries aren't made in laboratories or observatories, but in the messy, complicated interactions between beings trying to understand each other. Like all good stories about humans, this one didn't solve everything. It just opened new questions, created new problems, and somehow left everyone involved both frustrated and oddly satisfied. The cultural bridge builder position became official, with Bennett as its first and most infamous bearer. He went on to prevent 17 potential wars, accidentally create 3 new philosophical movements, and earn the dubious honor of being both the most popular and most exasperating diplomat in the galaxy. But that first day, when everything started with a simple compliment and escalated into a trial that nearly triggered a war, that remained legendary throughout the diplomatic corps. It became a cautionary tale taught in every cultural sensitivity class. The day a human nearly started a war by saying, "You look beautiful," and somehow ended up bridging gaps between civilizations. And me? I never did let him forget it. Every time he got too confident in his diplomatic abilities, I'd simply say, "Remember that time you complimented my carapace?" His inevitable groan became a running joke among the crew. But secretly, I kept a record of that day in my personal archives. Not because the human's bumbling compliment was particularly noteworthy, but because it taught me something about adaptability that all my scientific training hadn't. Sometimes the most profound understanding comes from the most ridiculous beginnings. And sometimes, the best way to bridge galaxies isn't through careful study and preparation, but through genuine, if culturally clueless, good intentions. That's humans for you. Turning diplomatic disasters into professional opportunities since they first opened their mouths in public. The aftermath of what became known as the compliment crisis rippled through diplomatic circles faster than light particles through a quantum tunnel. But for me, life aboard the Nebula Whisperer took on bizarre new rhythms that no xenobiologist could have predicted. Kixa, we have a situation in Base 7, Bennett announced 3 weeks after his unexpected career pivot. The Chishu delegation is claiming our pressure suits are too aggressive. I looked up for my latest research on human neurological patterns. They have been my obsession since this fiasco began. Pressure suits can't be aggressive, Bennett. They are inanimate objects. Tell that to the Chishu. Apparently, our suits have shoulders that jut out too far, which they interpret as a threatening posture. Sometimes I wonder if the universe has a cruel sense of humor. Here was Bennett, once a clueless maintenance tech, now arbitrating conflicts that career diplomats wouldn't touch. We rushed to Base 7, where indeed, 3 Chishu representatives were performing what looked like defensive rituals around our standard-issue pressure suits hanging on the wall. Ambassador Threx, Bennett began, incorporating the traditional Chishu greeting gesture, a complex arm movement that took him weeks to master. "Help me understand your concern about our protective gear." Threx vibrated. It's how Chishu express agitation. Your battle-ready garments mock our peace-seeking nature. These shoulder protrusions signal readiness for combat. I watched Bennett process this, his face cycling through expressions faster than a diagnostic screen. "I see the issue. What if we modified the suits? We could rounded shoulder panels and added your sacred peace symbols." "Desecration," Threx hummed. "You would cheapen our symbols by placing them on weapons of war." Classic first contact miscommunication. To the Chishu, any protective gear is inherently aggressive. To humans, protection and aggression are barely related concepts. Bennett rubbed his temples. A gesture I'd learned meant he was thinking hard. What if, instead of modification, we created new suits specifically for Chishu interactions? Ones designed by your cultural experts. The vibrating stopped. Silence in Chishu diplomacy meant consideration. "You would allow our aesthetics to shape your protection?" Threx asked carefully. "We'd collaborate," Bennett replied. "Your cultural insights meeting our engineering. New equipment that respects both our needs for safety and your interpretation of peace." And just like that, another potential crisis transformed into opportunity. Within months, Chishu human design teams were revolutionizing protective gear across multiple sectors. The suits they created became famous for being both maximally protective and minimally offensive, a paradox only possible when 2 species decided to actually listen to each other. "You have developed a dangerous habit," I told Bennett one quiet shift when we were alone in the mess hall. "Which one?" He grinned, stirring something that resembled coffee but smelled like regret. "Turning disasters into innovations. It's becoming expected. Better than turning disasters into actual disasters." I clicked thoughtfully, a habit I'd noticed myself developing around him. "Your species has an unusual relationship with failure. Mine tends to analyze errors until we understand them completely before moving forward, and miss all the fun of figuring it out as you go." He leaned back, that disarming human smile playing across his features. Where's the excitement in knowing everything ahead of time? There's comfort in knowledge, Bennett. Predictability breeds safety. And stagnation, he countered. Some of our best discoveries came from spectacular failures. Penicillin, vulcanized rubber, safety glass. All accidents that changed our world. I spent the next several hours explaining to Bennett that controlled experimentation was far superior to chaotic discovery, while he spent the same time telling amusing stories about accidents that revolutionized human society. Neither of us changed the other's mind, but we did develop what he called respectful disagreement, which is apparently the foundation of all effective partnerships. The truly bizarre part of our new dynamic revealed itself during the Great Umbrellian Silence, a diplomatic crisis that nearly shut down interstellar trade routes. The Umbrellians, quantum beings who existed partially in multiple dimensions simultaneously, had stopped all communication with the Council. Their space, a crucial junction for shipping lanes, had become void to all signals. Dozens of diplomatic species had tried to reach them. All failed. This is beyond even you, Bennett, I said when the call came in. The Umbrellians don't think linearly. Their consciousness spans multiple probability streams. They're not being stubborn. They literally might have forgotten we exist. Or maybe, he said, that familiar spark of entirely unwarranted optimism in his eyes, they need someone who thinks in ways they haven't encountered before. The next day, we approached the Umbrellian expanse in a shuttle modified with Bennett's increasingly famous sideways solutions. Instead of trying to contact them through conventional communication channels, he proposed something only a human could imagine. We would create a pattern in space-time that would be impossible for quantum beings to ignore. Using the ship's engines, we traced complex mathematical equations in our flight path. Not just any equations, but deliberately unsolvable ones. We created paradoxes in movement, generating tiny quantum conflicts that would resonate across dimensional barriers. This is either brilliance or insanity, I muttered as we completed our 7th circuit of the deliberately flawed pattern. I'm told there's no difference. Bennett replied 12 hours into our pattern dancing. Something changed. The space around us hesitated. That's the only way to describe it. Reality seemed to pause, consider, then reconfigure. The Umbrellians materialized in our communication array, their quantum signatures stabilizing just enough for interface. Their voice came through as probability waves our translators struggled to process. Curious beings create impossibility. What? Bennett leaned into the calm. Because we were trying to get your attention. And because anything worth doing is worth doing in the most complicated way possible. There was a quantum pause, literally a moment where time seemed to branch and recombine before settling. Appreciate. Paradox. Communication. Welcomed. But how? Unpredictability. Plan. And that's how Jackson Bennett, the man who once nearly caused a war with a compliment, initiated first contact with beings who experience all of time simultaneously. The conversation that followed was mind-bending. Bennett, with his uniquely human ability to hold contradictory ideas, actually managed to discuss temporal engineering with creatures who saw past, present, and future as a single point. I recorded everything for posterity, knowing this might be the only successful human Umbrellian communication in history. 3 months later, the Umbrellians not only reopened trade routes, but established the first cultural exchange program with a primarily temporal species. The first exchange involved an Umbrellian temporarily experiencing linear time, while a human researcher, not Bennett, thankfully, attempted to perceive nonlinear existence. Both participants described the experience as thoroughly confusing but oddly educational. The researcher developed a new field of study called sequential quantum psychology, while the Umbrellian wrote what became an acclaimed memoir titled How I Spent My Linear Vacation. By the end of our first year as accidental diplomats, Bennett and I had become something of a legend. The Council started sending us to their most impossible problems, not because we always solved them, but because we reliably turned them into something bizarre but workable. We have created a monster, I told him after our latest mission, where we'd convince the hive mind collective to respect individual property rights by showing them how individual creativity could enhance collective intelligence. Pretty sure we created several monsters, he replied cheerfully, and at least 2 new religions. Don't remind me. The Graviton faithers who'd formed after our interaction with the stellar engineers still sent Bennett daily offerings of pure mathematics. Their worship services were essentially physics lectures, but beneath the chaos and the unlikely success, something fundamental had shifted in how I understood the galaxy. Bennett's approach, chaotic, intuitive, and frequently backwards, had shown me that perfect understanding wasn't necessary for meaningful connection. Sometimes, bumbling forward with good intentions achieved more than careful analysis. Want to know something funny? I asked him one quiet night cycle as we watched a nebula birth from the observation deck. Almost exclusively, he replied. I have been studying human neural patterns since our first incident. Your brain activity when you called me beautiful showed genuine appreciation for a biological aesthetic you couldn't fully comprehend. You managed to find beauty in the fundamentally alien. That's surprisingly deep, Kixa. Don't get used to it. My point is, your species' greatest strength might be its willingness to find connection first and understanding second. Most of us demand comprehension before acceptance. Bennett was quiet for a moment, unusual for him. You know what I think? I suspect you will tell me regardless. I think the universe is designed for misunderstandings that lead to better understanding. If everyone got along perfectly from the start, we'd never grow. I considered this. That's either profound philosophy or the most elaborate justification for your tendency to cause diplomatic incidents. Can it be both? Our laughter echoed in the observation deck, a human and Vorthack finding shared amusement in cosmic absurdity. We'd come a long way from that first interaction, when a simple compliment nearly started a war. As I write this account for the diplomatic archives, I realized Bennett was right about one thing. The most meaningful connections often begin with the most ridiculous circumstances. Our ongoing mission to prevent cultural disasters, create new partnerships, and occasionally invent entirely new forms of communication continues. Just last week, he accidentally created peace between 2 species who'd been at war for 1,000 years by teaching them both to play poker. The shared language of bluffing and bad odds apparently transcended ancient hatreds. I stopped questioning his methods after the first 50 successful impossibilities. The galaxy is vast and strange, filled with beings beyond our imagination. Yet here we are, a human who nearly caused a war by being nice, and a Vorthack determined to document every second of the chaos, bridging gaps between civilizations one bizarre success at a time that I never did get a straight answer about whether Bennett still found my carapace beautiful. Probably for the best. I have learned that with humans, especially this one, the journey is always more interesting than the destination. And sometimes, just sometimes, the most beautiful things emerge from the most awkward beginnings. Here's to Bennett, the accidental diplomat. To uncomfortable compliments that change the course of history. And to the universal truth that understanding begins the moment we admit how little we understand. The galaxy, it turns out, operates on chaos theory. And humans? They are less disruptors than amplifiers of what was already there, hidden beneath layers of careful misunderstanding. Sometimes I think the universe saw us all taking ourselves too seriously and sent humanity as a cosmic joke. But like all good jokes, there's a truth hidden in the punchline. We are all just trying to figure out how to talk to each other without accidentally starting wars, creating new philosophies, or revolutionizing protective gear design. That's diplomacy. That's life. That's what happens when you tell an alien she looks beautiful and somehow end up saving the galaxy through a series of blessed accidents. The future remains as unpredictable as ever. But with Bennett as the first cultural bridge builder, at least it won't be boring. And really, in a universe full of wonders and terrors, isn't avoiding boredom its own form of wisdom? I will let the universe answer that question, preferably through another improbable crisis that somehow evolves into interstellar friendship. I have a feeling we will be busy.